It's a good evening, Maneru, Ndimadekwana, and welcome to everybody that's out there watching this video today. Supposedly should have been a live broadcast, but our apologies for not having to get that right. I don't know what the technology is doing today, but for whatever time that you're watching it, I'm sure the information, the discussion that we'll have, and the talks that we'll go through today will still be pertinent to your situation wherever you find yourself. This is another edition of Live Chats on Monday, and I'm your host, Ronald Muringai. Today, we have a special guest, a friend of mine. We invited together, and she is now a minister, a mother, a wife, and very recently an author too. Miss Andiswa Kunjansis.
It's
really, really good, a pleasure and an honor to have you to gracing us today on this live chat session.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
Right. So you wrote a book, a very telling book, I should say. The title kind of just gives it away and sells it all. The Waiting. Tell us more about the book. What happened? What really made you write that book at this time?
Writing the book, you know how the Bible talks about, when God has given you a certain comfort in a certain area, that the expectation is that you'd comfort others with the same comfort that you've received. So basically, the reason why I wrote the book was, on that nerve. The title of the book is called The Waiting. I'd waited on the Lord. Just a little bit of a background. I got saved when I was 22 years old. And since then, I'd always wanted to get married, even before 22 years old. I wanted to get married, and then it took long. The promise took long, and I had to go through certain challenges, like a lot of challenges in the waiting season. So, but I had to hold on to the hope and trust that God is faithful, and there's integrity in God and His word. So whatever He had promised me, because he had told me that one day, He's gonna make me a wife and a mother. So it was a promise that I had to hold on to. But I didn't know that it would take so long. I mean, I was 22. I referred to 22 because that's the only reason you can say that you're waiting on God for marriage, Otherwise, you're waiting outside God. So I had waited even before, but I don't want to account that because it was up to my own strength and I messed up big time. But then when I got saved, I learned to depend on God, and I experienced challenges in the waiting season, and all the seasons of being hopeful one season, the next moment, you feel all defeated. So when God finally did it for me, I wanted to look back and just pass on whatever lessons that God had given me to someone else who's also waiting out there.
So you're telling me that, in fact, there's a song that I kind of remember from back in the day. I don't mind waiting. I don't remember that song, and it kind of encouraged us, and comforted us. For some of us who got married late, anyway, to say we don't mind waiting. At what point in time, I would say, as you sing that song, as you go through that kind of sentiment, do you think, but God, I hear that I don't mind, but in your mind. When did that happen? Something like happen along those lines for you in your particular walk?
Yeah, most definitely. Like I was saying, there will be moments where you feel like you're on a high. Yes, you don't mind waiting. And then there'll be those moments where reality, was kicking in. When you're 22, I thought I'd get married when I was 25, and I didn't get married. But there was also delays in the area of my career. So I figured, okay, maybe that's the reason why, God, I still am not married. So when I finally graduated and everything was in place, I started minding waiting. Like, okay, so what is it that you're probably waiting for? And also, when I hit 30 now, that was the biggest. At 30, society also starts speaking the most. Your body starts speaking as well. That by now, you have needs. The body has needs, like sexual needs and stuff. And also, as a woman, you start remembering or being exposed to or coming face to face with the realities of things like, what happens if you give birth to a child at a certain age. So you start worrying what's going to happen to your child. Will they have Down syndrome? Will they be deformed in any way? So those realities, they start kicking in, and there are moments of fear. But one thing that helped me during those moments is knowing that, God, if you're gonna do waiting, you have to do it right. And the only way of doing it right is by doing it God's way, because you are trusting him, you're waiting on him. So the delay is not on your part. If you wanted to take a husband or a wife for yourself, you do that. But you're waiting for one that he best prefers for your life. So I had to hold on to the fact that I'd seen him coming through, which is one of the things that help as well, to have those monumental experiences, encounters with God, where you go like, oh, but I've seen him in this area. I'd seen him in my career coming through after years. So I was like, okay, if he did it for me in this area, definitely he's gonna come through even in this one. So that's one of the things that that assist in those weak moments.
And I think you mentioned something, I would say, there's so much pressure that comes through, especially from a societal perspective, A friend of mine kind of got married now recently, and she was telling me that, she had everything. She had a house, she had a car, she had a successful career, everything was flying. Mm-hmm. But as soon as you get home, people will start asking, uchata nini? I'm sure there's an advert that's on TV that's kind of similar, where this guy, Gogo, is asking this guy, unyala nini? When are you getting married? So, and that's almost normal. What would you say about this? What's your take then? Are we putting unnecessary pressure on young, successful women, perhaps, who are trying to chase a career? Or are we saying as society that you cannot really be described as successful until such a time that you actually put a ring on it? Is it what we should be expecting?
I think society puts unnecessary pressure on us. They're supposed to, we're not in charge of our lives like that. There are certain areas, even careers, you can't even say with career, I'm in charge. Because like I said, for some of us, we experienced a delay in the career, and it wasn't because we didn't pass well in matric. Do you understand? So there comes a time where you get confronted by certain things, where God confronts you with the reality that he's actually in charge of one's life. So society is putting unfair pressure on people. And this thing about age, putting an age restriction or milestone to say by this age, you're supposed to have done this. By this age, you're supposed to have bought a house. You're supposed to have bought a car. You're supposed to have a child. You're supposed to have been married by now. It's very unfair, because nowhere in the Bible does it say that by this age, you're supposed to get married. So what it does, it puts this pressure on individuals so much that unless there's a greater content inside, and a greater resolve of of knowing who you are, mean that I know that I am God's. I know that I am waiting on God. Unless you have certain resolves like that, society can push you so far away from God. I know people who had served God so zealously in their young years until 30. Then after 30, they start having children. You start falling into sin because you're succumbing to societal pressures, where they are telling you, when I'm talking about societal pressures as well, I want to touch a bit on doctors as well. Not doctors, let me just say people in the health science. I don't mean to attack, but I remember when there are also friends like this, when I finally got married and then I got pregnant, there were some difficulties, things like fibroids. And I remember my doctor saying that, people like you were just wanting to pursue careers and you wanted to put children aside. But I was like, no, that was not me. I was waiting on God. So now I know people also who had the same fibroids, but they're outside marriage. So they removed the fibroids the first time, the second time, then the doctor says the third time, you can't be cut more than 3 times. It's a risk. So put Christianity aside, go and have a child outside marriage. You know what I mean? So that's why I'm saying these things have a way of putting so much pressure that if you don't have a greater resolve inside, it will cause you to compromise the very standards and the very Christianity that you say that you ascribe to, if I can put it like that.
And I think I would like to engage you further a bit on that, before we speak about, the new generation and what we should be giving to them. Like you say now that there's that pressure that comes through, of course, from external forces and the biological clock that you touched on, and of course, doctors giving it. So I'm thinking in a society currently where women are already under so much pressure, trying to measure up to what men are doing, facing all these gender-based attacks and all this societal norms and pressure that we kind of put against women. Would you say then perhaps then there's something that then becomes a discouraging element when the clock is ticking, the ring is not coming, Abuti is not showing up? Is there a balancing act that potentially you personally had to go through to ensure that, you have that kind of resolve that you're talking about right now and not fall into the trap?
The first thing is a resolve. Like, why are you waiting? You need to get that and to get to the bottom of that. If you don't, society and every pressure that comes around you will take it out of you. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Sure.
It will expose it. If you're not waiting because of God, because you are following, you want to live a life that honors Him, then when the pressure starts coming, you're gonna end up being one of those walk away to say, you know what, I need to get children. God is not coming through, coming through. I remember one of the things that my mom used to joke about. She would be like, Andiswa, it's the time, the clock is ticking now, my baby. I think it's time for you to have a child. In class, I don't know what it is in English. There's a way that when you have backslidden, you can come back. They call it unkonkoza. You can come back and repent. She'll be like, just go and get a baby.
I
then
get
you
it.
come and repent. God is
go and mess up, and then come back and
it.
fix it. I get it. I get it.
You come back in. So had I not known the reason why I was waiting, do you understand? I would have fallen for things like that. That mom is right. Actually, God is. But because during the waiting, one of the things that will help you is to know what you build your relationship with God. Build your relationship with God, because the waiting is not so much, at the end of the day, you realize that the waiting is not so much about the husband. It will, because after getting the husband, some people still are still waiting to have a child. You still wait to get a job. You still wait. There are things that I'm still trusting God for. But what I realized is that the principles that I had learned during my waiting season apply in all these spheres. And one of these principles is learning to understand, Lord, what are you teaching me at this season? Let me honor you in this season. Let me live it out best the way that you've designed it. So that's one of the keys. But one of the keys that I can just throw in there for accountability is that, when you're talking about you have those low moments where you feel weak and you feel lonely. And one thing that God helped me with after some time, having worked with Him, is to bring people that I will be accountable to. So during those, don't do the waiting season alone, because the Bible talks about there's a way that seems right to us, but the end of is destruction or death. So it seems right to you as long as you are by yourself. If you listening to the doctor, that it makes sense. It seems right that, okay, let me just, get a child. God will understand because I have fibroids. You know what I mean? It will seem right as long as you walk by yourself. But if you have accountability, and it's not someone who's the same age as you, same maturity stage as you, someone older, mean that those who have gone before us, those are the people that we ask for wisdom from, So that's one of the things that I would say. I had people that during the weak moments when life did not make sense, when I wanted to compromise, which is a reality, I had to report myself, which is one of the things that we have to exercise if you are to walk this journey in a way that is honoring God until the end. Report yourself. Where you feel like you're vulnerable now, you can fall into sin anytime. Report yourself to someone older. This is how I feel. Don't walk alone. Don't lock yourself. Avoid things that will trigger those things that will make you fall. If it's around, one of my worst season was around December, when families, we see families everywhere. So one of the things that I would do you go home, or you go to, I used to go to my pastor's house, spend some time there with the family. So for that moment, it lifts it up.
And
yeah, those are just a few that
I'm thinking now, potentially for somebody who's listening to you talking right now, and they say, but where now you can afford to say that now because you are now married and you now have the children, you know, and they're potentially still going through that barren season, that long waiting period where it just looks like a drought. What would you say to them right now to say, hey, Wena, hold on to that thing? What's the encouragement that you would give at this moment in time?
To someone, okay, first I want to say that it is not easy for me because I cross over, guys. My waiting began before I was 22 years old, when I gave my life to Christ. I decided to make a stand for sexual purity for as long as I remember. When I was in primary, I'm just making an example, in primary. So imagine from primary, maybe we're like 10, saying that I'm going to make a purity stand for God, even though I didn't know much about God. I'm not going to engage in sexuality, like in sexual intercourse and things like that. But I had to wait for that. When God decided to bring a man in my life, I was at the age of 35. So I can't, you cannot say that it is easier for me, because where you are, like I said, the reason why I wrote the book is to encourage and say that.
Are you saying you are currently older than 35, just for clarity purposes?
Yes, I'm older than 35. I'm sure.
Okay, no, you kept yourself well.
No, I'm 38.
Okay.
I'm 38.
No,
yes.
right.
So I was virgin until 35.
That's good.
Yes. So I know the things that you go through. We go through these things. I know what people felt, the desires when they start hitting when you're older. I know them. So I want to encourage people, you know, God is faithful. Hold on to that truth that God is faithful. And if God has given you promises about marriage, God is going to make sure that he gives it to you. But more than anything, I'd want to plead with you and advise that fall in love with God and not with his promises. Because the waiting season, it should be about you falling in love with God and living it the fullest. If you put so much pressure on marriage, it may not live up to it. I mean, to that expectation, because the keys that we're supposed to have gotten during the waiting season are required in the marriage sector. I mean, marriage, the institution.
Sure.
So do not look too much into and put so much glory into the arrival, and you miss the joy and the fellowship with God and the things that he will teach you, the treasures and the pearls that you will need when you get into marriage. If you run into marriage, you want to run out of marriage.
That's powerful. And now I'm thinking you have children now, and you potentially, from your experience, of course, and from what you've learned and all the societal pressure, and even the pressure at home, the pressure with family, the pressure with siblings, etc., you have a better understanding of this waiting thing now. How do we transfer the knowledge that you have, when Andiswa, to our children? How do we even start the conversation? Like you mentioned earlier, that you actually made a commitment to sexual purity when you're only 10 or 9 or thereabouts. So how do we put it and break it down in such a way that we begin to teach our kids about the importance of waiting? Where do we start and how do we do it?
Okay, so Ronald, I love it, because I look at my children and it's a legacy that I want them to carry on with, right? So you must get things right. You are not asking your children to abstain. Do you understand? You're not, abstinence is just a physical act of saying that, oh, I'm gonna hold myself, I'm not gonna, it is basically what I did before I got saved. But that can only hold you until this far. Do you understand? It's very short, the lifespan is very short. But you want a lifestyle of purity, meaning that there are other things now, when it comes to sexual purity, there are other things, dimensions of it. You know what I mean? It's not just the act that will cause you to be pregnant. So those are things that you want to transfer and teach and train your children up in. So you first have to teach them about God. No one has the ability to live a righteous life outside God. If we were able, then Jesus Christ did not have to come. So the same thing you transfer to the children. It would be unfair because most of us, we struggled with sexuality. Most of us had children, most people had children before marriage. Before, you do understand? And most people had abortions before marriage. Most people had like sexually transmitted disease before marriage. So for us, if you want a key now to say that what I couldn't do for myself, I want to transfer to the kids to make sure that they do it. One of the missing things that we did not have was God, a God-centered life. A life where God is the Lord, is Lord. Do you get what I mean? So the first thing that you must not walk away from is God. The Bible talks about how we ought to train the children in the way that they should go. And then when they are older, they will not depart from that way. What is that way? To train them, it means that we actively have to mold them. There's something about how there's nature versus nurture. Things that we are born with, this nature. Nurturing now means that you are molding, you are building a tree to go this way. So that's what, that's what happens with children. But one of the practical ways, one of the key components of this thing, that we have to do with kids, is identity. Put identity, teach them who they are. It's one of the areas that personally I struggled with for a long time, and it got me into a lot of dangerous moments that had it not been for God, I'll be talking a different story today. I wanted to know who I was. I wanted to feel loved. Do you understand? And if we don't get those things, the identity at home, society will begin to teach you and say that this is who you are. They watch TV and then they say this is who you are. Do you understand? I'll make just a small example. My kids have been telling them that there are no monsters, but because they watch these cartoons, now they're like, Mommy, I can't sleep, there are monsters. 2 or 3 years old. Do you understand? So society begins to teach and shape your children, whether you do it or not. But it is best that you are at the initial point of the nurturing part. That's the responsibility that God has given you. Tell them who they are. Tell them that they belong to God. And for you, tell them that my children don't belong to me. They belong first to God. And God has given them to me as a gift. And then God is saying that blessed is a man who has children, and the children are like arrows in a young man's hand, in a young man's hand. So you get to shoot those arrows into the future so that you will not be put to shame. What I'm trying to bring out from that is that it's our responsibility to mold them, to shape them. And we must do that very early, Ronald, very early. One of the practical ways that we've been discussing here at home is that at the age of 10 years, because some kids fall pregnant at 10 years, at the age of 10 years, you must have a deliberate talk, like an official talk where you make them make a stand towards purity, which we'll revisit maybe every year. Because there are people who took a stand for purity when they were maybe 15. But the parents never checked up on them until when they're 25. You know what I mean? A lot can happen in 5 years. A lot can happen in 10 years. So it's something that you have to keep checking on them. And I know that I think white people, do this best more than us, as Black people. So we take it back to ourselves to say, families, I'm the mother, I'm the father. It's my responsibility to mold them. It's my responsibility to give them the keys, to be the first point of introduction about certain things that are key in their lives.
Very, very, very important that. But I think you touched on something that I really want us to explore a bit further regarding, of course, the divide on how the other people get it right. And we, Abantu Abamnyama, kind of fail dismally at trying to open up this communication and have these conversations, difficult as they are, our children. Now, of course, I understand that there's a lot of cultural context to that, and Abazala Babuzwa, and that kind of respect that we have, whether I'm sure now, whether someone is Zulu, you are a Xhosa woman, for example. And it's almost similar in that. It's a conversation we cannot have because it's taboo. How do we move away, Andiswa, from that and say, Nyanke, this is what we have to do? Teach our kids, talk to them about sex as openly as possible, and ensure that they know what they need to know before the temptation starts to hit, and almost move away from the cultural mindset and the backing. How do we do that practically?
Okay, so our parents used to whisper. I've never had the sex talk with my parents. So they whispered about this thing. It was something that they feared that you wouldn't get into. And we got into so much trouble because they never spoke to us. So the idea that is out there in the world is that, and that children, whether you know it or not, at the earliest age, they begin to see things like pornography or nudity on TV. So their first introduction of these things is out there, or at school, the kids start showing them, these pictures from the internet. So that's their first introduction. So I think one of the things that we need, that will take the weight off our shoulders, is to realize that sex did not come from Satan. Sex came from God. It was designed by God. It is God who said that he took the man and the woman, and they became one. They shall become one in marriage. So that oneness, that sexual intercourse, and it has a responsibility, or there's a reason for it. Do you understand? So sex came from God. So it's supposed to come from us. If we're going to teach them about God, we cannot take sex out of the context, out of our discussions. And it will remove that thing of making it feel so scary. It's not scary. It's not, oh my God. Do you understand? When you realize that it's your responsibility, in the same way you're going to teach them God loves you. You are beautiful. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. You also tell them about sex in the same line. Do you understand? That you feel like you've been ordained by God now to transfer this information. Sex was ordained by God. It belongs to God, but he has designed it for a certain context, which is marriage. And if you do it outside this context, these are the results that will happen. Do you understand? The consequences of doing anything outside the will of God, outside the instruction of God, has consequences. So you tell them of the consequences as well, but you tell them, it also ties up to this thing of saying that you want to raise them in a way that says that live a life that honors God, so that even when they view this area of a life that is obedient, you live a life where you prefer God's will and God's heart because you love him and he loves you. A life where you delight to obey his instruction, not just in the area of sex. So it will spill over into the sexual areas, into every other area, the career, the spouse. Once you teach them those key things, that you need to live a life that obeys, of obedience, a life that honors God, and that will, also in the area of sexuality.
And I think that the loving God part is something that we should start as early as possible, potentially as soon as they're born.
Definitely.
I'm trying to think now with regards to this particular issue of sex. When is the right time, you think? What is the right age by which we should start introducing these topics to our children?
Okay, for my children, we intend to introduce it as early, maybe from 8 years. You just want to throw it in there. We may remember this is our first time having children, but because from research, that by the age of 10 years, some children have gotten pregnant at the age of 10. Yeah. So that you must try and kick it in way earlier than that. So let's say by the age of 8, if children can give their lives to Christ at the age of 6, do you understand? And these children are very fast, Ronald. Like, you've got a child, they're so fast. If you tell them about love, my child, one of them will come to me and says, Mommy, Jesus loves you. She's 3. Jesus loves you. She may not fully understand it, but she sees me telling her, Jesus loves you. You know what I mean? So let's say from 6 years, you're going to try and put hints about, how the body, cover your body, That's one of the things I already start doing now. Cover your body, when you're outside. Jesus doesn't like it when you do things like that. So you're just dropping these hints. But the official one that we intend to do it at the age of 10 years. The official one, we go out on a date with one, you sit down with them, you talk to them about sexuality, what this one is for, about God, what he intends, what the intention of sex is, and the context of sex. So we have as early as possible.
I'm thinking now with regard to what tends to happen in our Black families, and we find ourselves with children who end up being molested and touched inappropriately by molester uncles, and all these, the negative side of things, man. Because I see, of course, we're trying to preach the godless. I'm trying to equip our children to be a bit more open and understandable to what's happening in terms of society, but we're not with them 100% of the time. And sadly, there are these lurky, murky characters much in our neighborhood, in our families, that want to take advantage of our children who don't necessarily know what it is about these sexual issues. I'm trying to think now, could there be a link with us trying to conscientize them and open their eyes about these issues as a way potentially of preventing and stopping these molester uncles from taking advantage of our children? Is it something perhaps that you explored as well, or you think might become effective in trying to fight this abuse of children by these people?
I think it's something that we can do, Ronald. I mean, if you tell your child, don't touch this area, don't allow any person to touch this area, you know what I mean? We teach them that right now. They already know this part, they have names for it, these parts. So you say that don't allow anyone to touch them in this area. And then as working mothers, when you come home and then there's a nanny, for example, or they went to school, you bat them and you check, did anyone touch this area? Your whatever, you have a name for it. Like in a nice way, like, did anyone touch the child would tell you no, or yes. They're very smart, they're very quick and very honest and open. So I think that's one of the ways to say, don't allow anyone to touch this area. So if anyone wants to touch, the child says, no, mommy said that mustn't touch, in this area. As early as 3 years, they can say that, no, mommy, don't touch my bum-bums or something like that. They're able to say things like that. So I think that it's very important that we may not say that sex to them when they're 3, but we can say that, this part is yours. It belongs to you and Jesus, They understand that, so no one must touch it. Do you understand? Coverage. Don't go outside and show other people this part, So when they go outside, if anyone tries to touch those areas, they will tell them, or come to mommy and say, this one tried to touch this part.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's uncomfortable, unfortunately, but something really that we have to face up and deal with in this sick society we live in. And I think if somebody wants to get in touch with you, Andiswa, and wants to get a copy of your book, The Waiting, and all the gems and the pearls that you want to actually tell them so they don't have to go through all of that, because God has graced you, like you say, how do they get in touch with you?
All right, I've got a Facebook page. It's called, I've got Andiswa Oludare. That's my Facebook profile. But I have one that is specifically to this topic. It's called The Waiting, the Waiting page, The Waiting Interact page. It's both on Facebook and it's also on Instagram. So you can just leave me a message over there. That's how most people have done it. People have just sent me messages there, and then we'll take it from there in terms of, getting the book. I don't know if people have seen, I've got the book that basically talks about my life, how I waited. It also gives you key about the things that I learned during the waiting, the challenges that I went through, and how God brought me out of them. So people will learn not to do the things that I did, and also, it's not just about what I did. I say that there's wisdom in looking at other people's lives and saying, okay, I'm not going to do that, being wiser. So I talk about those things that I didn't personally experience, but I've watched people going through as consequence of their mistakes. So I include it in the books as well.
Yo, time flies. I see we're already done with our 30-minute allocation that we've asked people to sign up for. Yes. So I'm thinking, if I always end up with this question to say, if you had this stage, if, for example, somebody, just imagine, everybody in the world was watching this video right now, was watching this live broadcast, this webcast, what's the one thing that you'd say this is the biggest lesson that you'd want to leave them with, either from the waiting or just in life in general?
The biggest lesson that I would want to give out there is that pursue sexual purity. Pursue God, pursue sexual purity. It will save you a lot of unnecessary heartache and consequences. It is key to all the things that when we look back, we don't want our kids to go through the same thing that we went through. It is key. We know it. So for anyone else who, even in marriage, pursue sexual purity. It doesn't just stop when you are waiting on God. Pursue it. It will teach you a discipline that you will exercise in every area of your life.
Miss Andiswa, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know the girls are probably banging the door, Mommy, looking for you as it is. So we appreciate you taking the time, and I'm really hoping that people manage to get a lot of nuggets that you gave us today. You've held it for yourselves, folks. You've seen the book, and if you really want to get in touch with it, if you want to get more of these pearls of wisdom, get in touch with Andiswa at The Waiting Interact, right? On Instagram and Facebook, and you'll get a copy of the book for yourself. Otherwise, adios, and we'll see you again on Live Chat on Monday this time next week. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Ronald. Bye.